So we are here again on Wednesday afternoon after a rockin' interesting day on the market. Jeff, this morning I said I thought that Tesla might end up in the green, and I was half kidding. But we did barely make it by $1.75 or something today. What a wild and crazy day. But I wanted to start out, if I could, with your comments earlier today about automobile affordability. Elon's been talking about that in terms of interest rates, but I think you went a little deeper. And what are you thinking about in terms of affordability now? What do you see 6 months, a year, 2 years from now? I mean, is this an issue that's going to go away or an issue that's not going to go away?
It's a serious issue, and it's across multiple categories. It's not only if you just look at the automobile category, and if you look at everything around it, we are getting some relief in the cost of energy currently. But if you look at insurance, if you look at the average transaction price for a vehicle, if you look at the interest rate to get a loan, if you look at the rejection rate on loans, they are all at multi-decade, and some are at all-time highs. The loan rejection rate, this is how many people apply for an auto loan. It's an auto loan rejection rate. How many people apply and what percent are rejected? And, last year we were at 13%. It was becoming a big number. And now we're at 19, close to 20%. So basically 1 in 5 people, this is tracked by the New York Fed, by the way. This isn't some metric that's in the corner that people, sometimes look at. And the backstory is 8 out of 10 people that go to buy an automobile in the United States. So, there's 15.2 million in the SAR right now, in the seasonally adjusted sales projections for the year, 15.2 or so million vehicles. And what the data says is, 12 plus million of those people go to financing to buy a vehicle.
Right.
And of those 12 million people that go to financing, currently 1 in 5 are being rejected. Right. So that's, 2.5. Sorry, that's real-time math. That's close to 2.5 million people. Right. Being of those 12.5 million people that go for financing, 12 or so million people, 2.5 million people are being rejected. Mm-hmm. And what does that do? I mean, that's literally knocking out, multiple months of sales for auto. And it's a serious problem. And the thing that kind of triggered this commentary for me this morning was looking at the CPI and looking at insurance is up 16.5% year on year. It's up, I think, 54% since 2021. And it's auto insurance is outrageous. And there's a lot more that can be done with auto insurance to bring those costs down. There could be more real-time data that's used. It's ridiculous. And the auto insurers could get better about really understanding driving behavior and really tailoring premiums for people based on their driving behavior, like what Tesla Insurance does. At the same time, the insurers have real issues. Average transaction prices of vehicles are at all-time highs. They're at $48,000 is the average transaction price to buy a vehicle. That number was 38,000 in 2019.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these are dramatic increases in just 5 years. And, the question is, it looks like just from an affordable, people are being driven out of the auto market. They're being driven out of their ability to buy a home. And if you're following this space, you're following Tesla, you're following other auto companies, you have to, wonder like what's next. Is this kind of a transition point for the auto industry? They're already dealing with increases in ride share, and really in city urban environments, it's the whole landscape has changed. And what does affordability now do in terms of future auto purchases? It's something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, we already know that over the last, I think, roughly 10 or 15 years, when you get to be my age, you can't remember how many years it's been. But over the last decade or so, the teenagers have said, never mind. I don't, it's too expensive for the insurance, too expensive for the gas, whatever. I'm not going to bother. And besides, Uber and Lyft are easy, and I can do it based on what I can afford. So what was a rite of passage for you and me is no longer looked at as a rite of passage. It might be something you still want to do if it's more convenient than Lyft or Uber, but it's a transition. That theoretically the transition will be even stronger if we get into automated vehicles with a lower cost per mile in terms of that transaction.
Right. And I think there will be a large percentage of the auto market that changes as a result of this. And I do believe that the price per vehicle is an important factor in doing that. And we've got to get to the point. I think this is where Tesla is converging. And what Tesla is trying to do, what I see them doing with reduction in part count, and what I see them doing with transition to unbox model, is they're trying to get the theoretical future cost of the vehicle to be as close to raw material cost as possible. You've heard Elon talk about this, but there's a lot behind that, and what you can do with increase basically increased leverage of capital beyond and human labor beyond like any prior extremes, both minimizing the amount of capital, then driving the longevity of it, and also minimizing the amount of human labor, and just trying to get it to the point where you get the raw material cost close to the final product cost. And you probably change the configuration in terms of what are people paying for? Are they paying for this $48,000 thing up front, or are they paying some sort of like ongoing cost per mile?
Mm-hmm.
So if you get the price point low enough, to me, I think it's going to be one of the big debates. And I think it's been a big miss from some of the companies that do projections and discuss robotaxis. They've been ignoring the hardware costs of a vehicle. And I think it's going to be a big barrier, especially for this to work and to work at scale. You're going to need tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of these. If you think of the existing fleet size that's on the road today, and you think of what it has to be replaced with, you can't be building a $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 robotaxi. You've got to figure out how to build one for 20, 25,000. And you've got to figure out how to change the whole economic structure of owning that vehicle.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's talk about those two things in a little more depth. One of the things I've been trying to wrap my head around is we're not really building any more factories right now at Tesla, except for Sparks with the semi truck factory. I kind of added it up the other day. I'm looking at Shanghai maxed out 1.3 million. Does that work for you? I mean, that's pretty much a top.
I mean, possibly. You'd have to look at what they've produced in a peak month. Like last month, they're already, their published capacity, I think, is greater than 950. But I think last month they're already producing at a rate, of 100K over that.
Right.
So
somewhere in the 1.3 range. Let's just call it that. 700,000 is absolutely max at Fremont, unless they do something completely different. I think we could agree on that one. Berlin, I think, is still maxed at 500,000 until they build another additional facility.
Well, I think there's theoretical and realized capacity. I think they're two different things.
Right.
So I haven't seen Berlin run at a rate of 500,000.
No,
so I don't know.
I'm saying theoretical.
Yeah.
I think it's right. All right. And then Austin, I'm thinking Austin's theoretical is about 1 million. Is that what you're understanding?
I have not seen anywhere close to that.
I don't mean that they've, but I'm saying, given the size of the facility, given the they're making the Cybertruck there and the Y, we would expect maybe 500,000 of each, I would think, to be able to be.
Yeah, if you're just looking at floor space, I think that's one way to look at it. But they're nowhere. Yeah. I mean, I don't know it depends what year you're talking about too. If you're talking about next year, I think they're somewhere in the 275, maybe the 2.9, 3 million range in capacity. And they could be adding capacity right now as we're recording this video. We don't know. Tesla doesn't have to necessarily send a flare up in the air to do it. They publish it every quarter, but they've also become a little bit more ambiguous with the greater than signs on multiple factories.
Right, right. And then we've got the 40,000 for Sparks, which theoretically is ready by the end of the year, end of 25 or early 26, which is about 200,000 average other vehicles. So altogether, maybe if you were just pumping like crazy, we might be over like 3.5, 3.6 million. And Elon has suggested 2.7 for next year. So if we look at 2.7 for next year and we could get maybe stretching it all the way to 3.5, what do we do then? We're maxed out everywhere. We don't have another building underway. I mean, we have Mexico that's a theoretical next building, but we haven't even put in the first footing. What are you thinking? What are you thinking
Oh,
happens?
you're never really, I mean, at some point you are maxed out, but we're not today. I mean, if you look at what Shanghai has done over the last 5 years, there was, when that factory opened, nobody thought that it would be, whatever is now north of a million, 1.2 million. Nobody thought that it would get to that point. And Shanghai did earlier this year is they took the process time down to the Y down to 28 seconds, I think from near 40 seconds, and added 28% more capacity just by doing that alone. So I think that's what Tesla's focused on. I don't think they know the real extremes of where they can get with the unboxed model. Remember, unboxed redistributes capacity, so you're not in a standard serialized line flow anymore, but you have to build up capacity for those individual cells that are producing those modules.
Right.
So we haven't seen an unboxed capacity. Remember, unboxed is supposed to get us lower production costs, which should mean faster process times, uh, greater utilization of capex, and then greater efficiency of labor and greater capex efficiency. Otherwise, it's a failure. Why would you do it? And unless you're doing some sort of postponement or some sort of modularity thing where you're trying to put a bunch of different models out. But the promise from Tesla is it's the path to getting to lower costs. So to answer your question, I don't know what the unboxed capacity is going to look like. If it delivers on what it's been advertised, it should be the highest utilization per square meter, even cubic meter in the factory of anything that they have today. So I don't know if we can use today's standards and apply it to their future compact vehicle. If you're going all the way out to the end of 25, even in the 26, I think an unboxed, an unboxed factory and that capacity model are going to be different than what we look at today.
Okay. All right. So lots of ways to skin that particular cat.
Yeah.
Don't suppose we should mention cat at all for a couple of days, but anyway.
Yeah.
Waymo came out today with their safety data. What would you call it? On their website, they're going to keep a continuous update on their safety statistics. I wasn't clear as I looked at it that it was any more telling than Tesla's safety data that they're providing us. But all of us, I think, have been asking for Tesla to give us better, more interesting, more useful data about safety on the on the supervised vehicles now, but eventually, of course, the unsupervised. So what did you think about Waymo's announcement? Did you think it was useful? Did you think it's the right direction?
Yeah, I didn't see it, but what I would say about Tesla or any company, if you're, for example, if you have an iPhone, iPhone has this beta program where before they do the big release every September, they allow you to beta test it for 6 months prior, and they do multiple releases and they send them to your phone, just like FSD beta. But there's no website where I can go and look at the bug list for Apple's iOS beta releases. They don't have to publish it. They don't publish it. And Tesla doesn't have to publish that information as well. What Tesla has to do, I think Tesla is properly disclosing its safety data, I think on a quarterly basis. And Tesla will probably have to disclose more detailed safety data for unsupervised and regulatory approval around that. And I think that those data requests will be differed based on the region or jurisdiction. And that's where they're going to have to supply more data. But I've not seen any other data. The only thing I would say is it's really hard without a global standard, without even a United States standard. There's no regulation around this yet. I know regulation is a bad word for someone, but quite frankly, if we're going to be getting into machines that drive themselves, there should be a standard that says this is how safety is measured. And if you're stepping into this machine gets into a wreck once every a million miles versus
Caused
you
by the
driving is
machine.
sorry,
Caused by the machine, not
caused by the machine, right? And there should be some data on that. So I think there is some regulation around this and public disclosure, but not during the development process. That Tesla doesn't have to disclose any of that, but to get approvals, they will have to disclose to regulators. And again, the other thing is I don't know what I'm looking at with the other data. I don't know if there's a teleoperator in the background.
Yeah.
These teleoperator shops look like the old arcades we used to walk into with, the driving games and people sitting inside them and looking at the screen and driving a car. I don't know. Are those interventions counted? I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's why I think a standard's needed.
Yeah. All right. I am, of course, the optimist. And Elon kind of threw some cold water on my optimism the other day, although there was, I think, many ways to understand what he said at the All-In conference. Do you think it'll be 2029 before we hit 1 million plus on Optimus?
I don't know if that's a run rate or if that's a cumulative number of robots. I think that's open. Open to interpret. Well, a run rate,
okay.
Then that's, I've been saying this for a while. I have not been on the side of this thing's going to be, instantly, ramped up and ready to go. This is a very difficult thing to produce. The supply chains don't exist. The design that Tesla wants doesn't exist right now. Tesla wants 22 degrees of freedom, and they want a number of things. They want to move a number of things into the forearm that are currently in the hand today. Like even what Tesla wants from a design perspective doesn't exist. In my experience, you don't just release that new design and it's perfect and like there's no more changes. You have to go through an iteration cycle because even if you get it functionally working, then there may be a reliability issue when you try to do, 500,000 finger squeezes. All of a sudden, there's some reliability issue where it falls out of calibration or it's not functional.
Right.
And then you've got to go solve for the reliability issue. Or then there could be an issue with dust ingress or liquid ingress or all these different, things, or hyperextension where you bend it backwards. Like there's all these things that you have to solve. Once you get it functionally working, you have to get it working over various extremes. So I think there's a long road here, quite frankly. That doesn't prevent Tesla from putting hundreds of robots into a factory next year to gather data from Tesla factories. And I think Tesla will responsibly come up that ramp curve and do it faster and more responsibly than the other companies. As people are watching this space, the devil's going to be in the detail. Just because you see a robot in a factory putting a badge on a car doesn't mean that you've got something that's multifunctional, that's running at the right speed, that's running at the rate, that can be trained faster than a human. Remember, the whole thing with ramping a product in a factory is that area under the curve and how quickly can you bring a process station up to yield, to process time, the yield and the process time. And these are all variables that we don't know yet. But I think Tesla versus the other bot manufacturers are more adept at seeing this long game and planning for it. And I think they'll get there faster than anyone else.
Okay. All right. So you also posted today, this is your quote, regarding the ROI on AI products. You said, this is a fintech media invented controversy. The reality is the revenue and earnings actual dollar per day from NVIDIA will be higher on Hopper versus Blackwell for some period of time until Blackwell ramps. RN Blackwell is slow cost.
Right now. Yeah. Right now, Blackwell. Yeah.
Right now, Blackwell. Okay. Is slow costing, and Hopper still has demand that is greater than what they can deliver. Customers will take Hopper until Blackwell is ready. Also, Hopper is running at peak gross margins and lowest cost of goods. I wish many in the media, especially fintech, would critically think,
Yeah.
expand.
And there's no disputing that at this point in its lifetime, Hopper, which is the H100 series of components that make up, a lot of the current and most recent highest performing AI data centers, that its offering is probably at its best yield in the factory, probably at its lowest process time in the factory, and probably the best margins ever for TSMC and for NVIDIA. And what's different about this new product transition versus other normally when you're doing a new product transition in consumer electronics, usually the product you're coming off of is a bit tired and it's not running at its peak. And that new product transition is the lifeblood to keep that product line going, and then to re-ramp it up and to get it to its new scale, kind of like the iPhone cycles you see, for example, or some of the other type of product cycles you see. Normally, iPhone 15 is probably not running at its peak right now in August and September. It's past that point there, especially with the anticipation for the 16. And the same thing, there's a different thing happening with Hopper. And my point I was making with NVIDIA is they have two solutions right now. They have the H100, and then they're transitioning to the B200 Blackwell, the new solution. And what all of fintech is hanging on is what minute, what hour of the day is Blackwell going to ship? And then they're not looking at the fact that NVIDIA has more demand than supply. Every customer will take more H100s than NVIDIA is giving them today. And if Blackwell's 5 minutes or 5 months late, there's no end in sight to that H100 demand. And while they're doing that, while they're building more H100s, let's say there is a real Blackwell delay or a further delay. I'm not saying there is.
Mm-hmm.
Those H100s will be built at peak gross margin, lowest cost, peak gross margin, because there's demand. Pricing is steady. And if you were to say, well, if Blackwell, let's say it is on time, and you can start getting it out, what is Blackwell doing in the factory right now? It's TSMC. It's at its lowest in terms of gross margins of its lifetime. It's at its worst. It's running the slowest through the factory. There's probably all kind of yield issues they're working through. And that's the point. This is where fintech doesn't critically think. It's a better gross margin story. It's a better total margin dollar story. In one 22-hour period, they can get more H100 systems out than they can get B200 systems out, and they can do it at higher gross margins, lower cost. And I don't know why, my point of that message was, I don't know why fintech doesn't critically think. They're looking at the wrong thing.
And so today the markets were crushed early. NVIDIA, though, hung in there. And then all of a sudden, many people gave NVIDIA the credit for leading the market out of its lows of the day and running it back up into the green. But the main reason for the being crushed early in the morning was the CPI. I reported this morning that I thought the CPI was, it wasn't a horrific result, but it might be something that would cause the Fed to at least rethink the 50 basis point, if they had any inclination to go 50 basis points down to 25. And maybe, given the good news on labor last week, they might have to, well, not such great news on labor, but the overall economy, some of the economic good news we've seen in the last couple of weeks, that they might have to give a pause to whether they're going to decrease at all in next Wednesday. So, but the market seemed to kind of go along with that thinking as the day progressed. They're like, well, maybe this isn't as bad as it looks. Maybe we'll get that 25 basis cut almost certainly next week, and then we're fine. I'm getting very confused. I think a lot of people in the market are confused. Like every other article I read is either we're in recession, going into recession. The next one, everything is wonderful. And the market is never going to crash. And the next one is we're going to take a 20-point dive. So where do you come out on all this at the end of a crazy day?
I look at the data, and I reposted this earlier today. There's an account I follow, this really good macro stuff. His name's Caleb Franzen, and really sharp guy, and just flat out CPI X shelter. So CPI X shelter's extremely lagging, is plus 1.1% year on year, and it's minus 0.1% month on month.
Mhm.
And it's well below the Fed's target, since the mid 70s in terms of their historical targets. And it's the largest and laggiest component. And if you remove shelter, it gives you a real-time sense of where inflation is at, minus all the other.
Sure.
Um, and I think that's important to look at, because you have to look at the Fed needs higher frequency metrics. I don't think it's as bad. I think they are going to cut next week. I think they should cut next week. And there's other areas, and I think it's going to be pockets of recession that occur if we do. But right now there isn't an economic metric that is, crashing and burning and lit on fire, but there's a lot of warning signs in the auto industry. There's warning signs in several places. So, and there's this whole thing of this long and variable lag. So I just look at the CPI-X shelter is plus 1% year on year. I think we need to get on with it and start cutting. Otherwise we're going to be in serious trouble. And if you have this election happen where we go in to January of next year, and there's an administration that comes in that is pro increased taxation, and you've got this restrictive policy still on. Remember, you measure how restrictive the Fed policy is by looking at where inflation is and where the Fed funds rate is. And right now we're running almost, 280, maybe 300 basis points above where real inflation is. If you look at it ex shelter,
Yeah.
we're running, 450 basis points of restricted Fed policy above where real inflation is.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. The longer you stay restricted, the more opportunity in this restrictive stance, the greater the probability of that you are going to have something major, major crash. So I think we have to be careful. I think there's other forces happening in the world too, in terms of the auto industry, and the fact that US and Western automakers cannot go to China and make a bunch of money anymore. They can't go to other countries and make the kind of money that they used to make before, because of what's happening to global supply chains, what's happening with the rise of China. And from a tech perspective, that, they're going for domestic, they're going for their own brands. If you look at the Fold product that Huawei announced yesterday, right basically after the iPhone event, they announced a phone that folds 3 different ways, folds out to this beautiful screen. It's a $2,800 smartphone that has 3 million orders in the first 24 hours or so of release.
Right.
And so the world, the whole landscape is changing, is my point. The Fed needs higher frequency data, and they need to be more responsive. They were late. They were late to put, to put the interest rate increases on, and they can't be overtly late in pulling it off, or we're going to have a real problem.
All right. And finally, I'll allow you an opportunity, unless you have something else on your mind, but I would love to let you have an opportunity to give me your take on the debates last night, both with regard, if you choose to, who won, who lost, but also, did it matter? Will it impact? It's impacting the voting. What do you call it? The betting sites. They've given Harris a bump today. But do you think it's going to actually impact the polls? Do you think, because I've seen an awful lot of stuff from various people where they've asked people after the debate, has it changed your mind? What are you thinking? Who are you going to vote for? And it looked like it had no impact on, if anything, people were maybe more inclined towards Trump, even though maybe he lost. But what did you think?
Yeah, I thought to answer your first question, I thought the American people lost, because they didn't, the way that the debate was conducted, didn't hear a proper policy discussion. They heard lots of rhetoric and high level discussion, not of, here's my record, here's what I did for 4 years, here's what I did for the last 3.5 years, and here's what I plan on doing. Or if I've changed a position, this is why I've changed a position. This is what I learned that made me evolve in my position or my thinking. None of that was challenged. One side was fact checked 11 times and one side was fact checked 0. And, you could be a partisan hack and be on either side of this debate. But you're a real hack if you think that any politician from either side stood up there and didn't tell something that didn't require fact checking. I mean, there's some sites that have north of 20 things that the Democratic candidate said incorrectly that could have been fact checked and didn't. And the point is so the network went there. They said, okay, we're gonna fact check. So if you're gonna go there, it should be somewhat equivalent in your approach, but it wasn't. And any other thing of like, if you're crying about the refs after the game that, you probably didn't play as well as you should have. And I think part of that is true. I think there were lost opportunities for Trump that he could have grabbed. There's real simplicity in messaging here. Are you better off than you were 4 or 5 years ago? And if you have all these great ideas, why haven't you done them? And then I hear all these bizarre responses of, when you're vice president, you are the second most powerful person in the country. And to have that be your defense, that you don't make power, you don't do things. But then you can say you're the last person in the room when making decisions like Afghanistan. I mean, there were so many things that were left on the table, but the message could have came back to 2 or 3 key points. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And, why haven't you done these things over the last 3.5 years? And oh, by the way, one party's been in power for 12 of the last 16 years. So this whole conversation of we're not going back is to me kind of a bizarre conversation. And so I think the American people lost because they should have heard a better, more informed policy debate. I blame the way the debate was moderated, and I, quite frankly, blame both candidates for that and how they conducting themselves. I think they should have another debate. I mean, this is the most important job in the world.
Yeah.
And I think both candidates should be out in front of the media, and one side is and the other isn't. And they should be in front of a constructive, media, and they should have to debate their ideas. So until that happens, I think the American people are at a bit of a disadvantage. And I do agree with you. I don't think it meaningfully changed. I saw a metric that in 2016, after the first debate, Trump was, I think, 8% behind, and then against Biden after the 2020, the first debate, he was 9% behind in the polls.
Right.
And now he's essentially even.
Right.
So I think that's the reason that the other side is so quickly asking for another debate. First off, they contorted them. They handled themselves much better. They prepared much better. They had a game plan. The VP studied for a test. She went in and she executed she studied for the test, and then she brain dumped it. And it's almost like it was like a coach for a team, and the team got, and they ran a playbook, and she walked in with the playbook in her head, to her credit, and she ran it.
Right.
So, but I don't think that serves the American people. I think what serves the American people are great ideas and leadership. And we didn't get a chance to hear that from either side. So I think they should debate again. I don't think this moved meaningfully. And like I said, the races were a lot further separated at this point in time in the prior races. And right now they're basically neck and neck.
Yeah, I said today on X that I thought that if they do have a second debate, not only obviously should Trump prove that he's a great negotiator and make sure that that debate is in a fair forum where, both sides can be heard and they're not going to have this crazy 3-against-1 situation, but also that Trump, if he's not going to prepare, or if he's not going to prepare in detail, at least he needs to be strategically prepared. And I don't think he was strategically prepared. I don't think he had thought through the possibilities of how things might go with an A/B plan based on how things presented
Correct.
themselves. And I think his team let him down on that, or maybe it's all his fault. I don't know, but it was not, I don't think it was the way he would have prepared for a meeting with Putin or with Zelensky or with Bibi. I think the prep was missing. And if he goes again, even in a friendly forum, I think he needs to hopefully learn from that particular round.
Yeah, I don't think he won, and I don't think that she necessarily I wasn't informed better of her policies.
No.
So I think the people that are on the fence of like, should I vote for one person or another? I think they know Trump and they know what he stands for. I don't think if they're on the fence, I don't think they fully know what she stands for. And I don't think it was a lot clear. I know she just updated her website, so maybe there's more information out there. And just one other thing, finally, if ABC wants to be seen as an objective participant in presidential national politics in the future, they need to fire the head of ABC News this week and literally every single chain on the way down, because you can't have two candidates enter that again. And by the way, if it were the reverse, that would have been horrible too.
Yes, of course.
And that's not what we want. And quite frankly, I don't even think these debates are made for network news anymore. I think if you look at the kind of questions were tailored towards what I call coastal elites, where everything was around, Ukraine, everything was, it's important. Obviously, it's a war that's happening, but things were around Ukraine, things were around all these things that are happening. Meanwhile, people are like, food cost me 50% more than it did 3 years ago. How specifically are you going to fix the problem? Auto insurance is 54% than it was 3 years ago. How specifically are you going to help me? I'm getting to the point where I can't own a home, I can't own a car. These could be various people. How are you going to help deal with these problems? How are we going to figure out how to make things more efficiently and solve the cost problem for our country? And so I think the questions were not aligned to the mass, like the voting mass. It was aligned to what gets reported in coastally, Manhattan, San Francisco, news agent. It was aligned around that, and it wasn't really aligned around kitchen table issues or what people are concerned about.
Right. I would agree with all of that. So I'll give you the last word before I switch, before I say goodbye to you and
Yeah.
and talk about what happened today on the market and what we think might happen tomorrow. So any last thoughts?
No, I think we're at an interesting time. Markets, I saw the S&P again went and tested this 5,400 level, 5,405, and it bounced off of it. I think that's I'm not a short-term prognosticator of markets. Don't trade on any of my advice. I'm not a financial advisor, but I thought that was constructive today, the kind of reversal that occurred today. But I also think markets are jittery. They don't know if we're really coming in for a soft landing or not. But I think this is what soft landings actually look like, which is there's uncertainty every step of the way until you actually get to the soft landing. And this is, I think we're going to experience this volatility. I think it's going to be, I think there's seasonal volatility all the way to the middle of October. Usually the second half of October is pretty good, but we have this thing called a presidential election coming up. So we'll see. The markets move either way. Obviously, the crypto markets didn't like how the debate went last night. And, so it's going to be volatile, I think, going even into November. I think even seasonality is going to get run over a bit, but I think there's going to be good points and bad points. But at the end of the day, I don't think the soft landing narrative, I think the window is more narrow, but it's certainly not shut. And, if you're adding 114,000 jobs and your inflation is, around 3% or below 3%, and ex shelter, you're at 1.1% year on year, I don't think you're heading, into stagflation or a recession per se, but it's not off the table.
Okay. All right. Okay. Hey, thanks, Jeff, as always, for coming on and helping us understand a few things in a different way.
Yeah,
And
you as well, Randy. Thank you.
see you next Wednesday.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Right. Bye. So what we had today, as you may know, as we talked about just a little bit there, is we had the Dow, which had been down 600 at one point, end up 124.75 for the day. We had the NASDAQ, which was only down a little bit at one point. Maybe I forget what the maximum was for the day, but it was down maybe 50 points, end up 369.65. We had the S&P, which was also down pretty substantially, I think around 80 maybe points, end up positive 58.61. And Tesla, which had also broken down about $6, I think, $7, ended up $2, $1.96. In the after hours, Tesla is now down 92 cents. So half of that has been given back in the after hours. Now, the percentage basis, that was 31% up for the Dow, 2.17% up for NASDAQ, S&P up 1%, and Tesla up 8.87. NVIDIA was leading the way. NVIDIA was up 8.15% and carried with it the rest of the Mag 7 into positive territory. And pretty much the Cathie Woods also managed, except for CRISPR, all managed to get back into the green. Okay, so then what about the bonds? What's happening in the pre-market, in the bond market? All right, what we got here is we got the 10-year went all the way down to 3.653 earlier today. It's up 0.6 in the pre-market to 3.659. And you've got the 2-year is up slightly, also 0.4 of a basis point at 3.65. Now, what's interesting about this is we're now back to 1 basis point separating them. So what does that mean? I mean, seriously, what does that mean? We've got the 2-month up 1.2%. In the pre-market rather, at a little over 5%, 5.081. Now that's, well down from where it was, but still a very substantial distance off and higher, 140 plus basis points compared to the 10-year. So a very interesting situation there. Okay, let's go to the oils. Now the oil is being whipshawed right now. So we've got the hurricanes coming in. We've got less inventory than we were expecting yesterday, but we've got China, whose economy isn't using up as much oil, and we've got, Middle Eastern issues and whatnot. So everything. So what does all that mean? Unchanged in the pre-market. We're at 67.29, so still about a buck, I think, higher, a little more than a buck higher on Texas Intermediate. Brent has gone back over 70 at 70.61. And natural gas up a little bit more in the pre-market at $2.27 and almost 28. So that's pretty normal for natural gas right now. Gold down a tad, sitting at 25.40, right in the middle of this current kind of market that it's been in. Silver still under 30 at 29, up a little in the pre-market. Copper up 0.66 at 417. So that's actually moving it back up there quite nicely. We've got the dollar up against both the euro, but barely. I mean, less than. Call it unchanged, and up against the yen, 0.18%. Then, as Jeff was mentioning, the Bitcoin was all over the place today. Also, it ends up as of this moment down 398 for the day at 57,417. So. It could be going back down and hitting down in that 55, 54 range. Some people today estimating that it could have from here, not a having. No, this would be a half, the Bitcoin going from 57 down back into the under 30 range. At least one person predicting that. In the pre-market for the equities, we have the Dow down 23 or 0.06, S&P basically unchanged, 0.07 down, and the NASDAQ 2450 down or 0.13%. So that's where everything is with regard to the pre-market as we head into tomorrow. So what's going to be happening the rest of the week? Well, we got consumer confidence tomorrow. I'm always forget, is it consumer confidence or consumer sentiment? There's two. I forget which one is tomorrow. That's the main report that we get out tomorrow. And then, of course, we're in the quiet period for the Fed, so the Fed speakers are not saying anything this week. Next Wednesday, we do get, the big decision. So all of those things will be impacting the market for the rest of the week as they try to decide and position themselves for what the Fed is going to do. Tesla, I continue to believe that we're in the FOMO period here before 10:10. We've got a lot of time to get to my 265, so we could be looking lots of up and down depending on what the macro is doing and depending on news that might come out between now and then with regard to numbers or FSD benefits or things that are the latest upgrades on FSD, more sightings of Juniper, many things could impact the price of of Tesla over the next almost 1 month now that we are before the 10:10 event. Now remember, I signed up today for tickets, but if I don't get tickets, I'm going to be looking for that +1. So think of me. And I would sure like to be able to get into the building. I will be in Burbank, that's for sure. But I would really like to get in and take part in the main festivity. All right, that's all. Well, let's see. I could at least tell you that you should look at the Scott Walter, that's his name. Scott Walter, earlier today, we did a video. We talked a lot about where Optimus is right now. We talked a lot about space and what's going on with the space program. If you're interested in that part, I'll put that particular card right up here. And tomorrow morning, we'll just have the regular day. Cern Basher will be joining me as always. Not exactly sure what time. He could possibly end up, we might have to skip him to Friday, depending, because we got a time issue tomorrow. He's got some exciting news. By the time we talk to him, he'll have some fresh information for us with regard to some personal stuff in his life that I think you'll enjoy. All right, that's all I got for you right now. It's been great talking to you, and see you in the morning.